And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Hope everybody's having a great day. It's Thursday, May 4th. May the force be with you. If you're a Star Wars person, I grew up a Star Wars kid, so it's kind of a day, but I mean, not really that big of a day. But yeah, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. We're coming at you live on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres and live on Twitter at M Torres Sports. We got a big show in store for you guys today, but I'm not rolling solo. I'm joined once again by my guy, Collin King. How we doing, man? Thanks for being here.
Doing great. How about you, man?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a busy week, like we were talking about. Plenty of Oregon recruiting storylines, and a lot of things that we're kind of talking about, thinking about now that we're out of the spring game. So now that the team coverage is kind of starting to die down a little bit, the recruiting stuff is going to ramp up, and I expect Oregon to go on a run here before too long. So I'm just kind of waiting at the ready, trying to talk to people and get ahead of things as best I can. But yeah, kind of for this show, what I was planning on doing is talking about how Oregon is swinging for the fences when it comes to defensive line recruiting in the 2024 class under Dan Lanning, Tosh Lupoi, Tony Tuioti, and the rest of that Oregon football staff. But I wanted to look at it in a little bit of a different light. And the way that I kind of wanted to lay this out is I think that Oregon's offensive line recruiting has been very strong, for the past 4 or 5 years. And that's kind of what you expect when you have a guy like Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal running the show. Viana Telemaival also recently here, Adrian Clem. So Oregon's offensive line recruiting and Oregon's offensive line play has been great. But the kind of premise I want to have for this show is that the defensive line recruiting has not been where it's needed to be. And I think that now at this point in, the Oregon football program, because, we're a program podcast, I think that the defensive line recruiting under Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi is starting to catch up to that offensive line recruiting. And that's a huge part of the championship formula for Dan Lanning and the Ducks moving forward.
Yeah, and you look at how kind of Oregon has attacked this. They brought in a bunch of defensive linemen last year, like a lot. And that was Oregon's main need. Defensive line was a massive, massive need. That was definitely shown off in most every game this season, especially the Oregon State crushing loss in the Civil War game. Um, and you look at that and you think, okay, Dan Lanning's a defensive guy, and he didn't have a great defense last year. So how does he come back and how does he improve that defense? And well, he went out and got a bunch of freshman defensive linemen, and not just freshmen, but he also got some portal guys too.
Yeah, which I think, definitely shows you where his priorities are at right now. And especially with the 2023 class, I think another thing that we can kind of look at, we're going to talk about 2024 here and kind of just the overall vision. I think you have a lot more guys in that 2023 recruiting class on the defensive line that are more capable of being instant impact guys, right? We saw Mateo Uyunglele doing a really, really good job in that spring game. You don't want to make too much of a spring game performance, but he looked like he belonged on that big stage. He looked like he belonged at Oregon going against, former 5 stars like Josh Connerly, right? And that's kind of what I'm talking about when it comes to this podcast and how Oregon's swinging for the fences in 2024 with the defensive line, because Oregon's had those big time recruits along the offensive line coming to Eugene for a number of years now, right? Your Panay Sewells, your Josh Connerlys, like I just mentioned. I mean, they had Kelvin Banks in the 2022 class out of Texas before Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal left. And then that offensive line class definitely took a hit. But now you're seeing Dan Lanning going after guys like Kayvon Thibodeau, on that same level of status and, tier caliber of player. I mean, look no further than this past weekend, Colin. Look at the guys that the Ducks brought in for visits for that spring game just along the defensive line. You have numerous 5 stars, numerous All-Americans, David Stone out of IMG, Dylan Stewart out of DC, Jordan Ross out of Birmingham, Alabama, Vestavia Hills. the list goes on for just top tier guys that they're bringing in for visits, and they're not just doing it for no reason. I think they're doing it because they believe that they have a real shot at these guys, and I think that's what's going to ultimately pay off down the road is you get them on campus for a spring game unofficially, and then you kind of lay the foundation. Hey, how about you come back and get an even closer look for an OV with your fam on our dime, that type of a deal.
Yeah, and you mentioned that how they would only do this if they thought they had a chance. There are several players. I think I saw a quote about Dylan Stewart saying that um, that championship kind of pedigree from Dan Lanning was going out to the West and Pacific Northwest in Oregon. And you've seen a few recruits like this cycle and last cycle say that Dan Lanning is bringing that kind of, I guess, attention, or he's bringing really that kind of feel, that championship feel, to the Pacific Northwest in Oregon and in Eugene. And it's really, really interesting to look at because, I mean, you look at Cristobal, you didn't really see many recruits saying, okay, yeah, championship pedigree is going to be up here for sure. And you didn't really see necessarily the domination of the West Coast that you've seen in terms of recruiting so far from Dan Lanning. Obviously, there's going to be a few battles lost there, but I think really, really big point that they have a chance for all of these guys, and they have definitely cemented themselves into each and every one of these guys, like the race for their commitment. And even guys that didn't make it out, some of them are still very interested in the program and just had some reasons to not be there.
Yeah, so Colin Simmons is probably one of those guys that falls into that. I think from Duncanville out in Texas. Not a guy that Oregon's had a lot of buzz for necessarily, but certainly one of those big names that you want to be in those conversations for. One other quick note that I forgot to mention for you guys that are in the live chat, we're getting some of you guys trickling in here. We're probably gonna get to the mail, but we're gonna have a mailbag section I think towards the end of the live stream. So get those comments and questions in, and I'm going to try to kind of star them in StreamYard so I can go ahead and look at them once we kind of get through the meat of what we want to say. But yeah, that's a good point you mentioned, Colin. Just maybe not dominating the West Coast right now the way that you'd expect. But I don't think that's a problem. I think you're kind of picking and choosing the guys that you want and that you think are really capable of enhancing your program, right? And there's a bunch of guys that they're going after in this 2024 class. I mean, you look at the wide receiver spot just to kind of switch it up for a second. You got Aaron Butler, who we'll talk about a little bit later. There's a question about him. He's a big time wideout out of Calabasas in Southern California. Let's see, who else do you have?
Gresham.
You have Dylan Gresham, thank you, out of San Jacinto, which is like an hour and a half away from me or something like that. And then you also have, not necessarily West Coast, but West Region, right? Luke Moga, Oregon's new quarterback commit in the 2024 class. Jackson Jones, also out of Arizona. And then you also have Jason Brown Jr. out of Washington. So I think they're definitely picking and choosing their battles and those guys that you want to go after. But maybe with particular attention to the defensive line position, Colin, that you just don't find the caliber of guys necessarily out west that you need that can take you to the next level. Kayvon Thibodeau is one of them. That's a fact. We're not going to argue about that one here on this podcast. He definitely was one of those guys that takes Oregon from, where they were at to where they want to be one step closer. But that's just one guy. And we saw that only had so much of an impact because after Kayvon left, that pass rush wasn't where it needed to be. DJ Johnson, great career at Oregon. I think it left a little bit to be desired. I think people expected a little bit more from him, but he bounced back and forth between tight end and D end and ended up being a 3rd round pick. So, that's props to him and Dan Lanning and Tosh LaPointe on that front. But I think if you're going after these guys, like some of the ones we're talking about here, maybe we can maybe talk about Jordan Ross a little bit because he was on campus this weekend. I think these are more of the types of guys that you need to take your program to the next level.
Yeah, so Jordan Ross, I don't have a whole lot of intel myself on Ross. I've seen a little bit of film. He's a very, very, very talented player. Obviously off the edge here, as you'll see in the film, very quick to the ball, or to the QB rather, and definitely a priority for Oregon. It's something His burst at or off the edge does somewhat remind me of Kayvon. I'm not comparing him to Kayvon, of course, just saying the burst. Um, and I don't know if really, Max, there's something you want to add on about Jordan Ross. I just don't have all the details on him.
No, sure. That's cool. I mean, I think one of the reasons that Jordan Ross is an interesting player in my eyes is just because of where he comes from to start, right? I talked about him extensively on the Oregon Recruiting Hour episode of the pod yesterday. So go give that a listen and a watch if you want some, really in-depth analysis about that visit. But the source that I was talking to about Ross was just telling me about how Oregon has a legitimate shot here, and they knocked that visit out of the park. And maybe the more important thing is that this source knows Ross pretty well, and it sounds like he's pretty open to the idea of leaving Alabama, which I think is huge, right? Because you see a guy of his caliber, he's the top player in the state of Alabama on the 247 rankings. So you don't think normally, at least, oh hey, yeah, Oregon's going to go into Alabama and take the top player from Nick Saban, because that Nick Saban and his staff aren't going to let up on this guy. But there's still a long way to go, with Jordan Ross. He's heading to Texas for an OV next month. Recently dropped his top 8 that had, Oregon and SC, Alabama. I think Florida and Georgia were in there too. So it's not going to be an easy recruitment by any means, but these are the kind of guys that you need to bring in to take your defensive line to the next level, from good to great, right? That's what we heard all throughout the spring from Dan Lanning and his staff and his players. And then I think the priority maybe kind of goes, Collin, from getting, just a one guy like a Kayvon Thibodeau to multiple guys. Like if you can get a Jordan Ross, I feel pretty good saying that Oregon, leads, or is not, if not, a really high top school for him. If you can get a guy like Jordan Ross and an Elijah Rushing in the same class, you are looking dangerous.
Yeah, and for rushing, you look, Oregon's in a very, very good spot there as well. Um, didn't make it out to the spring game. He had some conflicting schedule issues there. He will definitely be back out here. He has his official, I believe, scheduled. And again, if you can get 2 of these guys coming off the edge, and you already think like you have at Oregon, they already have Mateo, and you add in 2 more 5-star edge rushers right there, and then you still have Birch potentially on the roster if he doesn't go to the draft this year. Obviously, you're gonna have Dorless and Mace Funa gone, but um, still potentially having Birch and Mateo, and then allowing these guys maybe to sit behind him for a year. I say sit behind; they'd still get immediate playing time, but definitely learn a bit from both of these guys and get better. And that's just something that Oregon needs. They really, really do. They need these edge rushers. They need these top tier defensive linemen. We've seen how in the past, like Oregon's had decent defenses, and then they have just not had a good D line, and it's ruined their season. You just saw last year, defensive line wasn't necessarily the issue in the Washington game. It was more of the secondary in that one, which they also addressed. But the Oregon State game, that was very clear and obviously the defensive line's issue as well as the linebackers. And you look at David Stone, for example, he's a defensive lineman. He's more of an interior defensive lineman. You look at Zadavian Sims, kind of same thing, more interior. These are top guys. I'm not really sure where Oregon stands with David Stone. Haven't really heard a whole lot. I know he did enjoy his visit quite a bit, but then yeah, I mean, you just look at all these high-rated guys inside and outside, and then there's guys even that Oregon's after that maybe didn't visit this weekend. They weren't scheduled to, but are still very interested and invested into the program.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit more about David Stone and Zadavian Sims in just a little bit, but maybe we can talk about rushing for a second, just because I have his highlights on the screen right now. So Elijah Rushing is obviously a big name on the recruiting trail, right? A big name that you got to know if you're an Oregon fan. The Ducks have been in the running for a long, long time. This is a super athletic, talented guy, crazy strength, 6'6", probably north of 275 pounds. And I think that he's one of those guys, right, that you just you don't often find out west, one of those body types, and when we say those body types, Colin, maybe we can be a little bit more direct. I feel like you're probably talking, anywhere between 6'4" and 6'6", and, you know, at 300 pounds, or a guy that you can kind of easily see putting on that kind of weight, and someone who's really physical, violent hands at the point of attack, and really strong. You have certain areas in the country that have their positions, right? Southern California has quarterbacks, wide receivers, corners. And then if you look more into the deep South, what are you going to find? Defensive linemen, offensive linemen, backers. So I think that's another interesting thing to look at. But it's a point worth mentioning here when we're talking about kind of how the Ducks are swinging for the fences, because you're bringing in guys, or at least trying to get guys that are, closer to home out west, like an Elijah Rushing. But then you're also expanding your reach. You're pushing into Texas, into Oklahoma, into Florida, into Alabama, which admittedly history tells us that the further east you push, the worse your chances are. But Dan Lanning's not backing down from that, and he shouldn't.
Yeah, and so you talked about Elijah Rushing quite a bit there. And Max, you look at this staff, I believe it was this staff, or just before Cristobal left, that Elijah Rushing's brother, his older brother, Cruz Rushing, was committed to Oregon he was going to be a walk-on, preferred walk-on. He ended up flipping his commitment to Florida and has since transferred to Arizona State. So I think Arizona State does sit somewhat towards the top, but
Is
still
it Arizona
Oregon.
State or Arizona? I could be wrong on
Either
that.
way,
I heard the story.
it's one of the two.
One of the in-state schools. My bad.
Either way, I think one of those two, whichever it is, again, sorry, I don't know, towards it is definitely going to be somewhat of a priority just because his brother's there. But it's really interesting that Oregon prioritized his brother, and I'm assuming in the hopes that it would somewhat draw Elijah towards Oregon even more. And Elijah visited with his older brother, I believe, twice during that time when Oregon was recruiting him. And it really has just grown these connections even more. And every time he comes back, it just gets better and better for Oregon. I could see one of the main teams really competing for him is Notre Dame. That's a team I've heard quite a bit about, being well up there in the recruitment there. But you talked about body types and not necessarily always being out west, and not necessarily out west in Arizona, like West Coast.
Western region,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, Western
It's
region,
broad.
but um, it's not very common, and Oregon has to capitalize on something like this. And distance for a guy like Elijah Rushing, not being too far, not being across the country, definitely just increases Oregon's chances.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, one more. I'll say this, and then we'll wrap up on rushing, and maybe we can talk about some of the other guys here in this class, that the Ducks are going after. Yeah, you make a great point about location and geography. Like it's not too often that it's on Oregon's side for a guy like Rushing. So it's important to go into the state of Arizona, which is becoming an increasing pipeline for the Ducks. They got a pair of defensive linemen from the state of Arizona in the 23 class. You're looking at Michael Gardner, who was already enrolled and was really drawing some strong praise from Casey Rogers, saying, I think, he was one of the most advanced freshmen that he's seen in terms of just picking up scheme and, kind of adjusting to the game. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but you can go ahead and watch that presser on my channel if you haven't seen it. And then Amari Washington is one of the best defensive linemen in Arizona as well. And I was talking to his coach, who admittedly would probably be a little bit biased, but he was saying that he probably should have been an All-American in this 23 class. Because when I was at that All-American Bowl in San Antonio, the West was getting eaten alive at the line of scrimmage, and they probably could have used a guy like an Amari Washington. So I think that Oregon's in a great spot with rushing. I mean, they've definitely been playing the long game with him, which is kind of another point that I've been making, with this two quarterback class discussion, with Michael Van Buren being the long game and then Luke Moga being a newer guy for Oregon, but he's already in the fold, so that's good. But yeah, Notre Dame definitely. I was going to say, if you weren't going to say it, they look like they're kind of emerging as a top competitor in this recruitment, for the Ducks. They had Keon Keeley as a recent guy that I think landed on an NFL roster. I'm not
Keon
totally
Keeley
sure.
is still in. He's going to be a freshman. Are you
Wait.
talking about
Oh, am I talking about? Is it no? Not who am I talking about? Keon Keeley's he's the guy who ended up at Alabama, right?
yes.
Okay,
I
who
know
am
who you're
I
talking
thinking
about.
about? Notre Dame. They had
Isaiah
an
something, I
rusher.
think.
Oh,
Foskey.
Isaiah Foskey.
Yeah,
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So Notre Dame had Isaiah Foskey. I want to say that he ended up.
he's in the Saints.
He okay. He's on the Saints. Yeah. Good
Drafted
stuff.
second
So
round.
yeah. So they have that kind of that they can bring to the table, right? And then the Ducks are going to say, okay, look, you got Kayvon Thibodeau in the NFL as a guy who came to Oregon and thrived. But yeah, I think with the edge conversation, I think that you've got to put Elijah Rushing pretty much at the top in terms of Oregon's big board and who they want, even though he's an edge, edge, D line, kind of the same thing. Outside linebacker, sometimes they get grouped into that, but defensive line, I mean, you're not exactly going to call a 6'6" guy an outside linebacker, probably more of
Yeah.
a defensive lineman. But I think we had a lot of good stuff on rushing. I think his official is set for June 2nd or sometime in June. And I love where the Ducks stand, but you got to make sure that you keep recruiting them and don't let teams like Notre Dame kind of mix it up here. Let's see.
Interesting point. Just kind of transition. So like Notre Dame's a team that currently sits, and they're like trying to get West Coast talent or West region talent. They're also in it for a California linebacker, one of the top linebackers in the nation. And Kingston, I don't know how you pronounce his last name, so I'm not going to butcher it.
Biliamuasa.
There we go. But yeah, let's go ahead and transition to the next one.
All right, who do you want to talk to next? I think I might have a little bit of intel on Zadavian Sims.
Yeah, let's go
I
ahead and
think I
start
have
with
to get
yours.
my notebook real quick, but I can at least get my highlights up here if you wanted to just start off by talking about him, and then I'll move off screen for just a second.
Yeah, that works.
All right, go for it.
All right. So Sims is a linebacker, or not a linebacker, geez. Defensive lineman out of Oklahoma. He is one of the top players, or he is the top player, depending on which site you look at, or even which part of 247 Sports you look at. He is the top or second best player in the state of Oklahoma. Um, he is a top 200 player in the nation, regardless of what site you look on. Um, and he's one of the top defensive linemen in the nation overall. One of the top 25 right now. And he's a guy that I actually really, really like. And I'm kind of surprised that we have shot up his recruitment, kind of like the contenders, I guess, how he shot up so fast there. I don't know, Max, what you want to share from your side.
Yeah. So I think the thing with Zadavian Sims, he's coming out of the state of Oklahoma, which isn't necessarily a state that Oregon has done a lot of work in recently. But if you know about the U.S. map, it's not too far from Texas, and Oregon is tapped in Texas, and they have a lot of connections there. But as far as Zadavian Sims, this is a really, really athletic kid. Listed on 247 Sports at 6'3", 275 pounds. I think I actually saw him at a 7-on-7 tournament that I was at out in Santa Ana earlier this spring, but I didn't really know too much about him. But he plays some tight end for his 7-on-7 team, C4, which is the name of the organization there. And he had some clutch plays for C4, in that tournament that I was at, and he's a guy who has really shot up with a lot of attention. And David Stone is a guy that I think was originally from the state of Oklahoma, even though he's out at IMG Academy now. I know we were going to talk some more about him later, Colin, but C4 is a talented organization, talent developer, 7-on-7 organization. I don't really know what to call it, but one of those distinctions. But they also had By Job, who I believe is at Michigan State
Yep.
now as an edge rusher. So he was another talented guy out of the state of Oklahoma, former top 60 recruit in the 2023 class.
And their
So
MSU is up there for Sims as well. One of
yeah,
the top contenders there.
yeah. So I think right now it looks like Michigan State is kind of the perceived leader. I know they have a little bit of crystal ball movement in their favor. But I think that this one's got a ways to go. When from the source I was able to talk to about this recruitment was Zadavian Sims. It looks like he's not in a rush for anything. He's going to take his official visits and then kind of go from there. But I think that Oregon has a pretty good shot. And I was a little bit confused because I think you said that you sent me something saying that Zadavian was back on campus. And I was trying to confirm that, and I think I more or less did, but I think it boils down to 2 trips in as many weeks. I think you were the one that was telling me about that one, Colin. Just like, hey, keep an eye out. I think that Zadavian's back on campus. So anytime a guy visits that frequently, I don't care where you're from in the country, but maybe even more so if it's a journey to get out there to Eugene. I think that says something, and I think it backs up what I'm hearing that the Ducks have a decent shot here for sure.
Yeah, and so he visited on a Monday as well, this past Monday, which a Monday visit is very, very odd. You don't usually see that for a recruit. Um, and he also visited with his mom. I'm not sure if he was on his own for the last visit or not, but that was something to note from the source. And I really wonder, really for Sims, he also has some other teams like the in-state Oklahoma team in on him right now. Arkansas is in there a little bit too. I really wonder how long this recruitment's going to take in terms of. I'm not saying like rush, hurry up. I'm saying more um, that I wonder how Oregon will play this in terms of will they schedule try to get the last visit again, which they usually do, or will they try to get him out maybe 2 more times, maybe get an unofficial and then an official later on? It kind of just depends on his timeline of when he wants to commit, whether that'll be after his season is over, before his season begins, over the summer even. It just really depends how he wants to play it, what his timeline is, and like you said, I'm not sure, or like you said, I don't know if there is a like specific timeline right now.
Yeah, I don't think there's a timeline for him, but I think for guys that maybe don't have a timeline, they'll probably generically fall into before the senior season starts because a lot of guys just want to get that thing wrapped up so they can focus on their senior year, going out with a bang, getting a state title, or maybe towards that December timeline so they can enroll early. That's kind of one that you normally see. But you also see guys that like to push past that, past February into April. We saw it with Josh Connerly, right? We saw it with Mateo a little bit, but he had a early decision, early signing period deal. But yeah, I think for Oregon and Zadavian Sims, I think they definitely have a good shot, and I'm curious to see kind of where this group ultimately ends up stacking up, and where the priorities lie, because it's a group with a lot of really talented guys, and when so many of them come out to Eugene, sometimes it can be kind of hard to tell, where are they really at? Who's a priority guy, who's just someone that you're taking a shot at. I think I have a pretty good feel, kind of from what we've talked about, Colin, about who some of these priority guys are. You have rushing, obviously. Jordan Ross is a major priority now, and then you have Zadavian Sims, who we mentioned, Joseph Jonah Ajonye from Conroe, Texas at Oak Ridge. He's teammates with Justin Williams, big-time 5-star linebacker that was out for the spring game as well. But maybe we can talk about, kind of just shifting here. You got to take your shots at your guys like David Stone, who I think is the #1 defensive lineman in the country. I'm stalling a little bit
Yep.
to look at it. #2.
Yeah.
On 247 Sports
Very top.
Composite, he's #2 behind Williams
Only Nor
Nawarni.
yeah. Yep. And that's another guy. I mean, Oregon's not really too into it, I'd say. But he's from Dan Lanning's home state of Missouri. And that's a state
Which
that
is something
Oregon
to
already,
watch.
yeah, and that's a state that Oregon already has gone to in the cycle at defensive line in Tioni Gray, flipping him from Mizzou, and definitely something to watch there. But back to David Stone, um, #2 defensive lineman. He is obviously very, very talented. I mean, obviously all these guys are. And, I wonder for him, how real of a shot does Oregon have? I'm unsure. I don't know that Oregon really has a terrific shot here. I don't have all the intel, but it's very good to see that he was out for a spring game visit, um, along with the rest of these players. And also, these players talk. They don't just they don't just keep it to themselves, right? If other players are there, along with other Oregon commits that are trying to voice their opinions on Oregon itself, these guys will all talk to each other, and they will take usually like a common perception from the visit. And you've seen a few players already say that they like that championship pedigree or SEC coming up to the Pacific Northwest. That isn't just one person saying that. That's usually a consensus. And that's really good for Oregon. That helps them big time going forward, not just this year, but in years beyond.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, and it kind of echoes the point that we hear from, from other. What was I gonna say? This is kind of more of a broad point that recruits are sometimes the best recruiters, right?
Yep.
So I think with David Stone, it's a guy that you got to take your shot at if he's willing to come out, especially on his own dime, right? Like we mentioned. I think some of the buzz coming out of that visit from some of the bigger names in the recruiting industry, like Wilt Fong or Chad Simmons, I think one of them was reporting that the Ducks have a pretty solid shot at getting an official now. But at the same time, Colin, I
He
don't
did
know if,
schedule.
huh?
He did schedule, just not a there's not a set date yet. I don't
Okay,
think. At
gotcha.
least it hasn't been released.
Gotcha. I was just gonna say that with this new rule that recruits can take as many officials as they want, I feel like it kind of could end up hurting, programs because they might need to wait longer when they want to get a guy, wrapped up and in the fold. But that maybe is a separate discussion. I just think that the fact that there's buzz around an official visit now, I mean, I think it already kind of shows that you're paying dividends bringing a guy like this out, like, top two defensive lineman in the country in David Stone.
Yeah, and I mean, just overall, we talk about all the talent that Oregon is able to bring in on visits and all this, but it's not just bringing them out on visits. That's not going to be the big selling point. The selling point is also going to be this season. Obviously, if you guys will commit this summer, but the selling point going forward for guys that are announced later, winning games and definitely at the position doing well. And also for some of these guys, seeing if they can come in and if there's development or if there is like NFL draft picks, which they won't see until well after they're signed or whatever. But you look at this past year, they're just like not even, yeah, I guess almost a week ago now, like DJ Johnson, edge rusher. He got drafted in the third round. You saw Jordan Riley also get drafted. And I think that points like this should definitely help Oregon in recruiting. And not only that, but I think maybe show what the staff is capable of doing, turning a player who not many people thought um, was going to be drafted maybe in Jordan Riley. And that's not because I'd say he's bad, but it's just like nobody really expected, I guess, as an Oregon consensus that he would be. And that maybe shows that the staff is developing players better than previously thought. And going forward, this is just a huge, huge step. Getting more defensive linemen and more players in general drafted will help Oregon in the near future.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I mean, a perfect example to your point that is, backing up your point is that I was out at Mater Dei the other day and I talked to five-star edge rusher Nasir Wyatt, who's a rising junior, but he already has, a bunch of the best programs in the sport coming after him. And he was there for the spring game at Autzen Stadium. And the Ducks absolutely nailed that visit. A home run visit is what I called it in my write-up over on Ducks Digest. And he was telling me about, I was just kind of asking him, what's making Oregon so appealing? What's standing out to you? And he was saying, it's seeing what Dan Lanning and Tosh Lapoy are doing. They have the first round draft picks. They have the edge rushers that have come through Oregon. He was talking about seeing all those guys from Georgia going to the Eagles or going in the first round. And he was saying, Dan Lanning had a part in that. It's obviously not just Lanning because that staff with Kirby Smart and some of the other coaches is just stacked. So, they played a part in it too, but Lanning was there front row and he was working firsthand with a lot of these guys, with your Jalen Carters and whatnot, with your Nolan Smiths, right? Who I think came out of IMG Academy, I want to say. I think so. So Georgia has the pipeline for IMG right now, Georgia and Alabama. So they got to be people to watch, especially for a guy like David Stone. But I think that you bring him out, you try to shake things up, and maybe they'll find themselves, in true contention down the road here.
Yeah, and just quickly, just talk about how Oregon sits among some other top teams for Stone. Despite Michigan State being an absolute dumpster fire right now, with all these
Everybody's
players
leaving.
leaving, um, they are in this one. Not as much anymore as they were. David Stone's favorite coach at MSU left, um, and Oklahoma seems right now to be in the driver's seat. Um, but obviously, I mean, over time, this can definitely change. Um, I would assume that Oklahoma, who is also in it for Sims as well, I would assume that they would be prioritizing somebody like Stone, maybe bringing him back home, but also prioritizing keeping a kid in state. It's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. Um, and I don't know if you wanted to talk about a certain prospect or recruit anymore, Max.
Yeah, yeah. I think we got a couple more we can touch on. I think we can talk about Joseph Jonah Ajonye a little bit because he was on campus for the spring game and he was someone I got to talk to. But just to throw some more names out there, I think another guy that I'm actually surprised I'm hearing a little bit more buzz about lately is Aiden Breland in the 2024 class, also out of Modern Day, which is just a ridiculously talented team. I was there for spring ball, like I was saying earlier this week, and they didn't even have pads on, and a couple reps were getting a little testy. Just from the physicality standpoint. I think that Ohio State's a school that's in the running for him with him taking that trip. He had on Oregon gloves during practice for whatever that's worth. I think that kind of gets blown out of proportion.
Yeah.
But Mateo was wearing Oregon gloves in one of the games that I covered this year, and I posted about it. It blew up, and then it ended up happening. But I don't really think it means that much if we're being serious about it. So I think Joseph Jonah Jonier is someone we could talk about. Jericho Johnson is someone I don't know as much about, but he's coming out of the Fairfield area in Northern California, 6'4", 300 pounds, right in that sweet spot that we were talking about earlier, with body type. So he's made a couple of trips. We
He,
have
sorry, just to touch on him
Go
really
for it.
quickly. He is a big time riser. Composite has him around the 200 range for 247 Sports, and then his pure 247 rank is near top 100. Um, Early on, I'll be honest, I thought that he would be a guy that was like maybe all Washington. It seems like Washington's D line recruiting and recruiting in general has taken a bit of a hit. They actually just fired their director of recruiting, which is not a good sign, but it's something that, from my sources, needed to happen. And Jericho Johnson, if Oregon gets involved here, I don't think there's any way. If Oregon really like prioritizes him, I don't think there's any way that he doesn't end up having Oregon in his top three. Truthfully, from what I've heard, he loves Oregon and loved his visit. It was an unofficial, I believe, 2 or 3 weeks ago now. Um, and I don't know what's next, Max.
Yeah, so I think it was important to touch on him because he is one of those guys out west that kind of checks off those marks, right? So I'm gonna be interested to learn a little bit more about him, but we're trying to touch on specific guys that we have tangible intel on, but then also at least just put you guys on hey, these are the names to watch if Oregon gets involved. Don't be too surprised. But yeah, the other guys that I wanted to talk about, and then maybe we can kind of get to some of these mailbag questions. Colin Solomon Williams is someone that got discussed
Yep.
in the comments here. He's a big time guy in his own right. Maybe not on the same level of some of these other guys that we're talking about, but Solomon Williams is a 3-star edge rusher, 6'3", 250 out of Carrollwood Day in Tampa. But he's got 44 offers, so take that 3-star rating with a grain of salt. But
Yeah.
he's made his way out to Eugene, I want to say at least once. So that shows you that they have some chance there with a little bit of interest. They also got Dallas Wilson, the 2025 wide receiver, out of the Tampa area. So kind of what you're talking about, Colin. Recruits talk. So I think that's big. But yeah, let's talk about. Oh, sorry, did you have a point there?
Yeah, so he's been in Eugene twice, and he's a kid. Last season, had 15 and a half sacks. He's a guy that I actually haven't really spoken much to, but just over DMs, um, he's a guy that's very, very interested in Oregon. That's just something that I really wanted to add. I think this is a kid that could definitely rise up to a 4-star, especially seeing all the traction he's getting from programs, I would not be shocked at all if he ends up being a 4-star pretty soon.
Yeah, and I mean maybe we can stay on Florida just for a little bit. I'm looking at getting his film up here in a second. But Oregon's doing some work in Florida, and I don't think it's gonna be, instantaneous results. But you get a guy like a Janoris Wilson out of Lakeland in 2023. And then in 2024, they don't have any commits from Florida, but they have a couple guys they're looking at, right? That we've talked about, David Stone, and then here we got some tape on Solomon Williams, who we talked about. I also think that the Ducks are, they don't have a ton of ties to Florida on the staff, but Alik Terry is from Miami. He's the new offensive line coach, so he's going to help them stay involved. Adrian Clem was a big piece of Oregon's recruiting in the Sunshine State last year. So I think if you can get these guys, I mean, I think that if you get a 3-star guy from Florida versus a 3-star guy from the Midwest or maybe even the West Coast, I think you're a little bit more likely like a Solomon Williams, take off and maybe pan out because he's going against better competition just on the daily, on the weekly out there in the Sunshine State. So
As a Midwesterner, I'm a little bit offended, but go ahead.
You got you got my point from that. You got my point. But yeah, I don't remember where I was going to go with that. But is there anything else you wanted to add about Solomon before we talk about Ajonye a little bit?
No, but I mean, transitioning now to Ajonye, this is obviously a big target for Oregon, trying to pursue Justin Williams, the 5-star linebacker. And a big tie like this would help out big time. If you can get a commitment, try to get that. Maybe that's just like another sort of factor that would help pull Justin Williams. And I wouldn't be surprised if actually Justin Williams was the one that committed first. From what I've been hearing after the spring game, fantastic visit. But Ajonye is a guy that another defensive lineman looking at Oklahoma. Oklahoma has been very, very good at recruiting defensive line in the past few years. I wouldn't say quite on the caliber that Clemson has been into turning those into draft picks, but very, very good there and something to watch. And when you look at a guy like Ajonye, you look at a guy that is maybe maybe one of the top guys for your class in terms of the entire defensive line. I don't know exactly where he sits in terms of rankings.
He's up there. He's up there for
Yeah,
sure.
so I think he is definitely one of the top guys that you're going to have in this class, regardless if you can get, I mean, obviously if you can get him. And Oregon should definitely be prioritizing him. We on Instagram, Oregon got the double post. Not that it means anything, but there you go. Social media again. It can be very, very misleading in recruiting. As you mentioned earlier with the glove situation. But Ajonye's recruitment is definitely something to watch for Oregon fans.
Yeah, it is, and I think that the Ducks are probably going to get an OV from him. They're a guy. This is a guy that's a little bit newer in Oregon's recruitment. Like we were kind of talking about, they've been way in on Justin Williams for a long time, but now you got schools like Bama and Georgia really giving Oregon a run for their money. And then Ajonye talked about maybe being a package deal with Justin Williams and how Oregon could be the place that they want to team up at the next level. Not saying that they're a package deal, but if they're going to play together, just talking about how every time Justin goes, he's always raving about the Oregon visit to him. That's what he was telling me in my interview with him. But yeah, he's a top 115 player in the country, 4-star guy, top 15 at his position. So in the Lone Star State, that's a guy you'd love to get. I love his game. And then I think the only other guy that maybe is worth a quick mention here before we get to some comments, some mailbag, Collin, is oh my gosh, is Williams. Oh my God, how am I forgetting this badly? Nigel Smith, not Williams. Nigel Smith out of Melissa, Texas. He's a big time target for the Ducks. Both Ajonye and Williams are predicted to Oklahoma right now.
Nigel Smith.
Yeah, Nigel Smith and Ajonye, I think, are both being predicted to Oklahoma, but there's definitely room for Oregon to make up ground in this one. And they also just got a commitment from Nigel Smith's teammate, Jackson Ford. So, he's going to be in his ear as a peer recruiter. So there's still so many big time guys that Oregon's in the running for. But it's a good problem if you want to call it that, because I think over time we'll see who comes back for an official visit, and then where do these guys take their other trips to kind of get a feel of where Oregon's at. So I think that's kind of a good thing, when you're looking at, even though you have so many guys here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have anything on to add on to that, but if you wanted to get started on those mailbag questions.
Yeah, let's do it. So Andrew has one saying, I know Simmons didn't actually make it out to the spring game, Colin Simmons out of Duncanville, but does that mean that the Ducks are basically out of that battle, like Raiola is no longer an option? I think with Raiola, that one's much more obvious. I feel like, if you're not getting trips from a guy, it's like I've said before, you can hear and read everything that you want about being interested in a school, but if you're not going to see it, I feel like that kind of, shows your hand. Not trying to slight Raiola or anything. He's got a bunch of big schools coming after him. He's the number one player in the country, for crying out loud. But for Simmons, I don't think that necessarily means that they're basically out of that battle. But we talked about all the other guys that they're in the mix for. And again, if you're getting a visit from a guy, I think that kind of tells you that you probably have a better shot with him. But he's only from the state of Texas, so it's not too far away. Like we saw with Nicholas Harbor and some other big time guys in that class. So I don't think that they're out of it, but it's not necessarily a development that you'd like to see. Put it that way.
Yeah, I think actions speak much louder than words, and you're talking about not coming out to visit. Um, it doesn't really matter if they just say that it's their dream school or something, like a lot of players do about Oregon. Um, they say it's their dream school, but then they don't come out to visit too much, right? There's other programs pursuing them. They end up going somewhere else. For Simmons, you look at it, he didn't come to visit for the spring game like was originally rumored to be. And looking at it from my perspective, I think that one of the teams up there is definitely LSU. Another team up there for him is Texas. I don't know much more about his recruitment in terms of that. I know that he also is prioritizing, at least a little bit, Ohio State, which has somewhat of a new development. But yeah, I don't really think the Ducks have a great shot there. I think they are kind of pivoting to what's next, I guess, and that is all these other talents that we've talked about in this video.
Yeah. So I think it's really kind of showing that, Elijah Rushing is a priority guy. I learned that he wasn't going to be coming for the spring game, Elijah Rushing. I mean, it wasn't a great development, but I also think it kind of helped out Oregon, because maybe we talked about it on the last pod, Colin. Like, it was just good that they were able to have him on campus as a main visitor throughout the week or whenever it was, and just kind of give him that one-on-one attention versus having him on campus for the spring game. And then you kind of have to bounce through. I mean, if you can, I don't know how Lanning does it. He's just everywhere all at once. Whether it's, getting in a photo shoot with a guy, or sitting down to dinner with him, or picking him up at the airport, like we saw with Jordan Ross. The guy's just a superstar, and he doesn't stop.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, that's the one on Simmons. Appreciate the question. Got a generic football question for Oregon, though, but I think it's interesting from K-Man. K-Man says, Sco Ducks, what position group do you think will perform the best this upcoming season, excluding the quarterbacks? You want to start with this one?
Yeah, I would love to. I think it's gonna be offense. I think
Position group?
yes, I will get to that in just a second. The defense. There's a lot of unknowns. So it's a defense that has has a big ceiling, but I'm not sure where they really stand, because spring game doesn't mean much. Sure, there were some good takeaways, but I don't know. I think it's gonna be running backs.
Okay, and why do you think that?
I think we saw last year Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington, Jordan James, and then you throw in guys like Dante Dowdell, um, and some of those other guys that are in there in that room. They were very good. They were very, very good. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised if Oregon maybe ran the ball a little bit more this season. I'm not sure what exactly Stein said. It was either that they're going to pass the ball more or run the ball more. I can't remember which. But it wouldn't really surprise me at all. And I do think the O-line is still going to be near the same level as it was last season.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that when I saw this question, running backs was the first group that came to my mind, but I don't want to have the same answer as you. So I'm going to go to the other side of the ball and talk about the group that looks the most solidified, the most promising, and that's probably the defensive line. And I would say that that really goes, end to end, right? So, edge rushers, defensive ends, interior. I'm including all of that in my answer. And I think for one, it's because of the returning talent you have at the position. Brandon Dorless, Casey Rogers, Keon Ware Hudson are some of the big names
Funa.
there. Popo's back
Funa.
along the interior, Funa on the edge for sure. But Popo coming back, I think, is one of the biggest developments. I don't believe we saw him in the spring game. I wasn't able to watch that live, so I could be wrong. But having him back, assuming he'll be healthy by the time fall camp gets ramped up and the season comes around, I think that's big. And then just the guys that you added to an already really talented bunch, I think are part of the reason that I think that they are really poised for a breakout year. And there may not be a group with a bigger chip on their shoulder than the defensive line for Oregon this year because they hear everything that we're saying. They're reading it. I mean, maybe not to the same level that a fan is, but the resounding sentiment was that that was a group that didn't live up to expectations. Even though they were one of the best run defenses in the country and in the Pac-12, they got destroyed by Oregon State in that game, which I think, really left a bad taste in their mouth. And they weren't able to really get after the quarterback. So just imagine the way that this pass defense could improve if they can get after the quarterback by adding guys like Birch, by adding guys like Mateo, Blake Purchase as well, Ashton Porter, Terrence Green, Tavita Pomet. I mean, the names go on, Colin. I feel like this is one of the best defensive lines that Oregon's had in quite some time. I think it's going to be better than that 2014 group that helped lead them to the national championship appearance because you have guys like DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead. You have those body types littered throughout the defensive line. And some of them are even true freshmen. And I'm not saying that they're going to play, but just from top to bottom and then building out the depth chart at that position, it's stacked.
That is a very, very hot take.
You don't think I don't think that's that hot of a take. This being the best defensive line since Defoe and
Well,
Armstead.
okay. Since then, it wouldn't really surprise me. Just because I don't feel like Oregon's. We talked about it at the beginning. Like Oregon's D-line recruiting and their D-line in general has not been up to standard as it used to be. I just think that I don't know if it can be quite on par. But I mostly agree. I think that the D-line definitely has a very, very big ceiling. Like you said, chip on their shoulder. And if they can get to the quarterback this year, I mean, that'll make the pass defense look so much better.
Exactly. No, couldn't have said it better myself. Let's see. We got Riding with the Mic. What's up, guys? Love your show. I can't wait for the season to start. I'm a new season ticket holder this season. Right on. Glad you got the season tickets. Appreciate you tuning in and supporting the show. Hope you've enjoyed it so far. Let's see. See Me on the Big Screen asks, what's going on with Fox Crater?
Oh boy.
This is an interesting one because he committed pretty early on in the process, went to like every Oregon game last year, not too far away, obviously in Vancouver, Washington, Evergreen High School. He committed to Oregon and then he's kind of really just shot up the recruiting rankings and really emerged as a national recruit this offseason with offers like, Texas A&M, Georgia coming in, LSU. I think Oklahoma's probably in there too. So he's been all over the place this offseason, but I think a lot of people kind of got the wrong impression when he was taking those visits because it coincided with Adrian Clem's departure. And they were thinking that, Clem's gone, so that's the reason that he's taking all these trips. And he was saying that wasn't the case. He just wants to take all these trips so that he knows that Oregon's the right school for him. And he's not going to throw away, months of relationship building that the staff has already put in. So I think that that's another thing that's worth mentioning. And the last thing I'm going to add here, I need to talk to him because I haven't talked to him in a while. So hopefully I can check in with him. The Oregon coaches were just at his high school yesterday. That's another thing to kind of keep an eye on. Now we're in the spring eval period. Now that spring ball is over, coaches are getting on the road all across the country. And they made sure that that was a spot that they stopped at so they could check in on Fox. And I think I don't have a whole lot of updated intel on this one, I'll be honest, but I don't really see a major reason to be too worried right now, at least in my opinion.
To add on to that, so one of the visits that he took, actually maybe two of the visits that he took, were because he was visiting with his dad, because his dad is down south, I believe in Texas, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he was originally planning to go, I think it was to SMU's maybe spring game or something like that, and that didn't end up happening. Um, me personally, I'm not necessarily on the same page in terms of like liking that. Obviously, Fox has his own approach to it. Um, I would love to see him stay committed and stay at Oregon. Um, I just think when you take all these visits, it's kind of hard to not like see the fans look at it and be like, okay, well maybe he's like silently reopening somewhat, or um, like he said to you, making sure that Oregon is the right team or right school rather. Um, it'll be something to watch maybe. I'm a little bit more worried than you are, but we'll see how it unfolds, I guess, over the summer.
Yeah, and I think two things that are going in Oregon's favor here is the fact that he committed early, because I think that kind of coincides with Oregon being one of those schools that showed that faith early. They were in on him early, and then all these schools and all these offers are coming in after he's kind of blowing up, on the circuit, on with camps and everything. And I think that at least from talking to Fox, I don't think that that's something that's going to be lost on him, because I think about that comment that he had about, I'm not going to throw away months of relationship building. So I think the fact that Oregon was in early is going to help. But I will say, if you had to look at somebody that could maybe be, I'm not going to say likely to flip, but you see, or decommit, you see, kind of the writing on the wall about why an argument could be made for that. But right now, I'm not too worried, but we'll have to see what happens. And then the other thing I was going to mention, he's not too far from Eugene in Vancouver. So that makes me think that the staff's kind of going to look at him as if he is an in-state recruit. And the mentality that comes with that is that you can't let guys that are capable of contributing to your program, capable of helping you out of the state, or go play for somebody else. So I think that that's kind of what gives me a little bit of confidence right now. Admittedly, though, I do need to kind of try to get some fresh scoop on this one and see what they think. All right, let's see what else we got here. This one comes from Wink, and it was something that we were talking about actually just a little bit earlier, Colin. Wiltfong dropped a crystal ball for Colorado to land Aaron Butler. Any validity to this?
Yes. Yes. So Aaron Butler's dad played with Dion. Go ahead and preface with that. His dad is definitely, as you told me, a big driving force for Colorado as a top school coming off the visit. And I know I've said that social media doesn't mean much, but when you comment about a team every single day for the span of 2 weeks, um, leading up to your visit and then continue it after your visit, um, this is kind of me just blowing off some steam. I'm a little bit upset about this one, but there's not much you can do here. Dion, obviously, he's already kind of been a decent recruiter, um, and then the connections here, and that's a big thing with Dion. It's a big thing with Colorado now because Dion's there. The connections because of him being a Hall of Fame guy, a Hall of Fame corner, and also being a high caliber wide receiver at the same time, which is what Aaron Butler is. He wants to play wide receiver in college. Was a corner, or was recruited to be a corner by USC. It's speculation on why he decommitted. And yeah, so that's where Oregon kind of got in on him pretty recently, and then got that visit. Moved the what is it? I don't know.
Needle?
Moved the needle on him, right? And then you see just 2 weeks later, that needle is gone. But we'll see. I may just be completely overreacting to it, or he may commit soon. But from what I've heard, this is definitely a very, very valid prediction.
Yeah, so just to kind of give my 2 cents on this, Aaron Butler's a guy that I've talked to a couple times. When it comes to covering his recruitment, got to see him in person at UA Next in Mission Viejo, and this is a twitchy dude, really explosive, crafty guy. Definitely isn't lacking for confidence by any stretch of the word. He's very, very confident. But yeah, I think it's not that surprising to see this pick, because when I was talking to him, Colin, it was kind of hard to get a feel for where he was at, and this was before that Oregon visit that I think kind of kicked up the momentum, because he was talking so highly about every school that was in his top list. You have Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Alabama, Georgia in his top 5 right now, looking like a decision probably right around the start of the summer. But I think he's very impressionable, as a lot of recruits are, right? They go on that visit. He went to Oregon, and then there was all that hype about Oregon, predictions coming. He went to Colorado for the spring game, and then now you're seeing this pick from Wiltfong, switching things up on it. But I think, yeah, from some of the sources that I've talked to, especially out here in Southern California, where Butler's from, I think that connection between Dion and his dad is a big part of it. I'm not saying it's the only reason that you're seeing some of this momentum, but I think it's part of the reason. If you played in the NFL with somebody, you grind with them, you sweat with them, and you play football and you go through some adversity and everything. It just makes sense. As a former NFL player, you're gonna probably want your son to play for that guy if he's coaching. I'm not saying that's the only factor behind it, but that's part of it probably. And playing with Travis Hunter and playing with Cormani McClain, that was something that he talked about as very appealing, just playing with the best and getting after it with them in practice. And I believe the words he used was embarrassing them. So that's what I'm talking about. Back-to-back number 1 corners for Colorado, and here you have Aaron Butler talking about how he thinks he can do whatever he wants, which maybe he can.
Okay. Sorry. Best of the best, and then you want to go to Colorado. I'm sorry. But like Oregon, as it sits right now, has a much better roster, far better roster.
Oh, sure.
Now this might get clipped and then bite me in the rear if Oregon somehow loses. But I don't know. I mean, I would agree with what you're saying, the impressionable part. Obviously, you saw that hype with Oregon right after the visit. You saw that hype from Colorado right after the visit. There was also before that, even before the Oregon visit, there was hype for Georgia. A crystal ball also from Wiltfong. He's changed his crystal ball 3 times now just on Aaron Butler because of impressions. And it's very hard as well. I don't blame Wiltfong for this. It's just that it's really hard to get a read on kids that are impressionable because you don't know where their actual overall recruitment is. It's just that they're, the most recent. And so with Oregon and for Aaron Butler, if they can get a last visit, that'll be huge. Because the guy that's very impressionable, and I think that is part of why Oregon wants to get the last visit for everybody. That is your last impression on a recruit.
No doubt. No, that's a huge part of the strategy, is trying to get that last visit before a commitment. I don't know if he's set his Oregon official just yet. But this is a guy that Oregon's going to stay in the mix for. And maybe if he does end up going to Colorado, I'm not saying it's a guy you don't want by any means, because he's extremely talented. But you do have some momentum with Dylan Gresham, who I think is a similar type of receiver to Butler. I'm not saying they're the same player, but definitely 2 really playmaking kind of guys with a lot of speed. I haven't gotten to see Gresham in person yet, so that's something that's on my list for sure. But I think that, Oregon's already in the running for so many wide receivers in this 24 class. Ryan Pelham's another one from the Southern California area. Jeremiah McClellan out of St. Louis. There's plenty of options, but Aaron Butler is as impressive a receiver as you'll find. So I think that as long as the Ducks can stay in the running for him, I think they're going to want to do that. But we're just kind of taking the pulse here.
Yeah, and this is one that I could definitely see going all the way to signing day. Just again, the impressions. You get an unofficial, and even that, that can go a long way.
For sure. We've gotten into a lot of really good stuff here. Colin, starting with D-line, O-line comparisons and getting all the way to some receiver talk. But appreciate the comment here from Wink. The content that these fellows are dishing out is too good to have one. Let's turn this up for Max and Colin. Appreciate it. But yeah, we're kind of winding down here, Colin. We hit that hour mark pretty easy. But any final thoughts here on the original topic, I guess, of defensive line recruiting, Oregon swinging for the fences, or any other recruiting thoughts you wanted to add?
So actually at defensive tackle, um, just posted a little bit ago. Oregon it's just a reaching out. It's nothing serious, but Oregon did reach out to a Ole Miss defensive line transfer in Tywone Malone. I believe he's a defensive tackle. Was a top 90 player in the 2021 class. Has 3 years of eligibility remaining. You can see obviously there's a pretty long list there. USC is another one. I would not be surprised if they're very, very involved. But it's whatever.
Where's this guy from? I know he was at Ole Miss, but where's he from originally?
There's the On3 database right there. You can click on that link.
There we go. Okay. He's from New Jersey originally. Went to Bergen Catholic, so that's a powerhouse program for sure.
Maybe look at Penn State then because of location, but I would not be surprised if USC was a heavy favorite here or a very, very big contender.
Yeah, just because they've been living in the portal. Bear Alexander, Anthony Lucas, they're prioritizing the portal without a doubt. But yeah, that's maybe a note that we can wrap on. So, man, appreciate you guys showing out in the chat. Got to give you guys some props there. Keeping the comments and questions coming, and we love interacting with you guys. But Collin, before we get out of here, where can people find more of you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Insider Ducks and on Instagram at ducks.insider as on the webcam.
All right, right on. Well, if you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorresports. If you're here on YouTube, make sure to like that video and subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future streams, future videos, all that good stuff. If you're looking for Oregon recruiting, I am your guy. I'm here for all of it. Can't get enough of it, really. It's really, really fun. And maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew since we're still waiting for a run for Oregon, where the commits are just rolling in. But when it happens, you can bet that I'm going to be covering it. And you guys can find my coverage at ducksdigest.com and share the podcast with your friends, family, and other Duck fans. And until next time, appreciate you guys taking some time out of your day to talk some Ducks. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.